I just pressed record, so I'm going to do that over again. Welcome to episode 2 of the Hot Zone, because Zephyr forgot to remind me when we're transitioning to live to press record so that I don't have to pull the Twitch VOD. But it doesn't matter. I recognized it in time. But we're here. My name's Y4SO. I've got my good friend Zephyr joining me here on our second episode of the Hot Zone and Apex Legends podcast, where we cover everything going on in the Apex competitive scene in North America and EMEA. Zephyr, it's another Thursday. How we doing, my man?
It's been a day or two.
And guess what? Everybody can hear you right off the bat here because I have my sources set up correctly, so we don't have to redo your intro this time.
Good. I'm excited to talk a little bit about Apex, but as I told you before getting this, I'm a little conflicted emotionally right now, but that's okay. I still love a lot of y'all.
It has been a busy couple of weeks, ton of things going on, especially in Pro League. A couple more weeks of qualifiers under our belt since the last time that we spoke here on the show. Series E qualifiers are done. We're going to be talking about that. Of course, a big announcement from FaZe Clan that we got yesterday that I think nobody was surprised about, but it's still cool to talk about.
My God.
And then, of course, the big topic that we're going to be covering today is going to be what came to light, courtesy of, one, a lot of talent in the scene, but as well as Jake Lucky amplifying a lot of stories yesterday. Big thank you to him in regards to talent and production pay in and around the ALGS. So a ton of things to cover today, and we're really not going to waste any time here. Let's bring up the topics so everybody could see what we're talking about here today. Let's start, though, with Pro League Qualifiers, Zephyr. Again, 2 more weeks under the belt here as we return to the show. And that means that we've got a couple more teams in both EMEA and North America joining the fold in Pro League. Talk to me about EMEA right off the bat.
Okay, so obviously it's been 2 weeks since the last time we discussed anything regarding qualifiers, so that means we obviously have 2 new teams that are now confirmed for Pro League. The big one was obviously VZH during their second run back into it, and we talked about the transition before we went into that week with G-Dolphin joining the roster. Well, they absolutely slap shit obliterated the competition, and it was no contest regarding who was going to be in Pro League at a certain point for them, and I'm very excited to see how they redefine the meta in Pro League, especially with Dolphin adamant on running the Rampart for now, and we'll see how effective that plays in EMEA. But Firepower is obviously the second one to round that one out. I think the biggest kind of staple, how to define them, is they're the most improved roster that we saw in quals, going from what was a 19th position in the first week to a 10th in second, to finally winning it all in their third week of play. Obviously, they've seen some slight roster changes, but it was obviously remarkable to see that continued growth over these last kind of 21 days or so to net them where they currently stand. So as it stands, that's the 3 squads that are now officially in EMEA. There's one, of course, spot left up to next or this upcoming Monday. And then the 4 or so squads that will qualify off of their points alone, which is beginning to become a bit more dicey, I'd say. Obviously, you can see there on the list right now, it's Bitfix, High Peak, High Society, and Incentive Arise, but there's no guarantees that any of those 4 will make it through. Obviously, Bitfix, very likely. But
yeah,
I've spoken about this. Even just dropping, say, somewhere in semifinals, is enough to potentially usurp that position. And for teams like High Society, Incentive Arise, right, they haven't been completely consistent. I mean, Incentive Arise alone has just lost Lufka, which is a huge issue for that team, as they're going to now have to recover someone with points, someone as a third, and that may leave a spot open. And then on top of that, we don't know exactly if there's going to be 4 spots for Pro League or potentially more, with issues currently revolving around teams like Scars.
So I want to ask you, because we talked about the VZH situation on our first episode. Of course, G-Dolphin leaving the team that he played with in the first week, reforming this new roster. And I'm curious if this was kind of to your expectations, or were you surprised at all by the kind of quick response and surge to the top of qualifiers that we saw from VZH, and how they qualified basically right off the bat after reforming this roster? Was that a surprise to you or no?
Obviously, I had my concerns going into it, as
Mhm.
anyone should. You throw a roster together immediately a few days beforehand, there's no guarantee it works out. And it's something that we have seen. You go down that list, you look at some of these other teams, a majority of them, especially as you get past this top 10, have seen a constant restructuring of their roster to try to
Sure.
put together that God squad to get them a victory. Because at this point, that's all they have.
Yeah.
They're not going to qualify off points. They have to search for that. So I think G Dolphin, as someone who has had, an experience within Pro League alongside VJ and Zane, who are just dominant fraggers,
Mhm.
it wasn't particularly surprising to see them find success, but I don't want it to be a commonality. Obviously, it's not something that other teams can just willy-nilly do.
So now, as we go into the final week, you're talking about Bitfix likely feeling fairly comfortable. Even High Peak is in a good spot. You do have to remember that when you look at that 4th through 10th place and consider the fact that you're going to get just short of 1,500 points for a second place finish, there is still a ton of movement that can happen in the top 10 as well as outside of it. And then, of course, as you mentioned, there is the possibility that one of these teams doesn't make finals and they get usurped by a different squad. So there's a ton that can happen there. When you're looking towards this final week of qualifiers then in the EU, what are the 3 teams that you have your eyes on the most? Because I'm assuming where we will get the one team that will auto qualify, and you said we aren't exactly sure on how many other teams will qualify. Are they not in a similar situation as North America, where it'll be 30 teams total and they're qualifying 8 to 10?
No, you're right. It's going to be like that. It's just
Okay.
we don't know. We don't know the exact number right now with
Okay.
Scars kind of dissolving, whether they're going to put together a very quick Pro League team to work with, or it's just going to bounce back to another open position.
Okay. But
Hasn't
who are those
been
3
confirmed.
teams then
Yeah.
that you're looking at, whether they're on this top 10 already or just outside of it?
So obviously, the big one to note right now is going to be High Society.
Mhm.
They were literally points off. It was a gap, but it was definitely points away from taking the win this last week up against what was Firepower.
Sure.
It's probably the best performance we've seen out of them thus far across, I don't know, a few months of play. There can be extremely hit or miss. I will say, even if they don't come away with a win next week, it's very likely that they do qualify based off of the consistency in their performance. I think for them, that's one. Usually, I'd say Incentive Arise, but the problem is they just lost out on Lufka. And so I don't particularly know who's going to be their third or if that's going to be a good fit for them, because going into this final week, depending on where they sit on points after their third comes in, I mean, it might come down to the fact that they just have to win it, which we both know is a different kind of circumstance regarding pressure and position, etc. Right? And we'll see how that fares. If I had to pick someone who's consistent, it'd be Bitfix. Obviously, last week was terrible for Bitfix. I don't know what it was about the lobby, but Bitfix did not have the same level of control or grasp on the situations that they had shown in weeks 1 and 2. I don't know if people are getting more comfortable or if particularly Bitfix are now in a situation, where they feel the pressure. Granted, they've set themselves up wonderful points. Doesn't quite matter. So High Society, Bitfix. And then I'm a little bit of a toss-up here. I think I have to go with High Peak. I know it's literally the top 3 on that list, but there's a reason they sit up there. They have been the only 3 rosters to be consistent. High Peak themselves have been a really big surprise for me. I didn't expect Hong Kong, Bavis, or Fricks to come into preseason qualifiers with a level of dominance that they have shown. I mean, in fairness, we look at them in their previous pursuits on alternative teams, and they've been strong, but nowhere close to the level we currently see now. And it has been impressive to watch them. Much like High Society, though, I think they can be somewhat 50-50. And while they do put up kind of top 5, top of the leaderboard performances, securing that win dominantly hasn't really been something historically that I have seen from them. If I had to maybe touch on some underdogs, I obviously do look down there towards Game of Drones. I think they are a team that is very much capable of winning a day. It's just they're so out of practice from literally not being within the scene for like a year.
Sure.
That it's like it's always a toss-up how they will work out. And then if we go down the list, UTFT apparently has figured out the zones, and they've been slightly improving. I'm for UTFT, I'm more worried about whether or not they can even make the point spread after this, because man, they'll kill me. I just don't think they walk away with a win, even though they promise it every week.
Yeah, I mean, they are within reach of that top 8 spot, but the hard part is they're going to need some help from the teams above them, right? It isn't a huge gap between them and Dose Esports. It's only it's actually less than 300 points, so that is certainly something that can be made up. But if Dose makes finals, then UTFT is likely going to have a really good performance, and Dose is going to have to finish probably down towards that bottom 5 to make up for that gap. And even making it into that top 8 doesn't guarantee anything, because you also need Game of Drones to likely have not as great of a weekend in qualifiers. And even then, like you said, we aren't 100% sure on how many spots there are available outside of those first place finishers over the 4 qualifiers. So nothing is guaranteed. So really, if you are a Dose Sports, or is it Dose Esports? It's messing me up because it's the lowercase e. Okay.
You know, at the end of the day, if you want to call them ZBM, they used to go by ZBM for a long time. So you know what?
Yeah. If you're ZBM Game of Drones of UTFT, nothing is guaranteed, and you are under the most pressure of these teams inside of the top 10. So you really need, if you aren't taking first place, you need to be in that top 3 to top 5 to even start to feel comfortable about your position at the end of qualifiers. So definitely a ton of pressure on those teams. Any kind of final thoughts you want to give on EMEA before we shift to North America?
I'm just particularly looking at some of these kind of like outstanding ones that you don't have up on the board here.
Sure.
The only team that I could particularly look at that might kind of work away with a win is a team by the name of 3 Muppets.
Okay.
They had a rough start where they performed super well during semifinals of week 1, didn't show up during the finals, missed out on week 2, and then they come into week 3, and for some reason they actually look like the same qualitative team that we saw during semifinals of week 1, a team that was almost looking to be surefire into the Pro League here, and they managed to place within the top 3, or I think they actually finished just ahead of High Society. I might be wrong on what I've been peddling here. Yeah, in qualifier number 3, actually, no, they weren't. Okay, they were in 3rd, but they were literally right there competing for a top slot. So while they may sit in 11th right now, it goes to show me that they are a team that could potentially walk away with a win if they are in the right mindset.
We'll definitely keep an eye on that. I'm going to pull up our stats from North America real fast, and we can shift gears. Of course, we talked a bunch about North America, especially because of the things going on with Team Esports Arena as of a couple of weeks ago. Don't really have more news on that front. It's been kind of amorphous. Capra's tweets have been a little cryptic, so we really aren't going to go in depth on that front. But we have 2 new entrants into Pro League based on the wins. We got Team Smiley getting in there, and we also have Rack Attack, so Rakanishu, back in Pro League once again, playing with Bowser and Impulse. So that is a very interesting team. Ton of just veteran experience on that roster. Team Smiley is very interesting because this is 2/3 of the Team Razor roster that finished in, if memory serves, last place in Series E this past season. And this was a team that had singular moments on a consistent basis. I felt like at least once a week they'd have a really good game that I was like, damn, if we could see this Razor on a consistent basis, they could be really good. But consistency was the one thing that escaped them on most often during that season. So I was just surprised to see them qualifying for Pro League because that competition is even steeper. The stakes are even higher. But as a player, I really like, and they had just a really damn good performance last week, and they're in, and they joined Rack Attack and Team Esports Arena in Pro League. And now the question is, who else is going to get in their season. Currently sitting in 4th place. Of course, you know that roster, the former Exit roster. They are certainly going to be favorites going into this weekend. BR Demons looking good. Slept On have been improving in terms of the Pro League qualifiers over the last couple of weeks because they didn't really impress me in week 2. And then, of course, Series Z qualifiers, they have not looked great. But there is, similar to EMEA, a ton of movement that can happen going into this last weekend of qualifiers, and I'm certainly looking forward to it.
I was going to say, I mean, this is obviously coming from my own perspective of the math here. You've got a much less kind of varied gap between, at least down what I can see there, 6th and below. Whereas in EMEA, there was definitely kind of more of a gradual slide there, which, to be honest, I look towards 9th. And somewhere like in EU right now, where I look towards UTFT and I do the math and I say that can be particularly dicey. This is very close to what we may particularly see regarding who works out of this one, whether it be between First Attempt, Chatamus, Redeem, Nightmare. I mean, they all can walk away with a very, very successful end here. Now, how many exact spots did you say are available just based off of numbers alone?
There are 8. There are 8. That 22nd team to be announced is FaZe Clan. They're going to be in Pro League. And then you've got the 4 teams that qualify based on their wins, and then 4 more based on those leftover points. So as of right now, assuming a season or a BR Demons wins,
right? Someone on
through top 8 is in at this moment, but it's a minimal gap, 60 points separating Redeem from Chatamus Prime and First Attempt. It's also important to remember that Team Vizio, I don't remember what team name they're playing under for Pro League Quals, but they're also in a good spot outside of the top 10. They didn't play last weekend because they were out in Arkansas for ReWired, but I talked to them and they feel very confident going into qualifiers this weekend that they could just have a good finish and be in based on points alone, whether they win or not. So there are a ton of moves to be made here. Void, yes, I should have known that because that's the team name they played on under before qualifying for Series Z. But yeah, I think there is likely going to be a ton of movement in these standings this weekend, and North America is going to be a crazy finish.
I definitely think that competition in North America is much tighter in terms of qualitative teams, because looking down this list here, I can very, very easily say that any one of these names, if they made it into Pro League, I'd have no question or doubt regarding the quality that they'd be able to put up, at least in this last kind of qualifier, to push them into that scenario. And I know between the two of us, we have multitudes of stories regarding any one of these rosters, whether it be back in Series Z, alternatively when Nerd Street was around, or anything else that provided.
Yeah, I think, and if I had to do kind of what you did, those 3 teams that I have my eyes on, it's going to be Season, of course. They have been really, really good. That win has just escaped them so far through the first 3 weeks, but I have them very high on my list. I would be very, very surprised if they didn't qualify for Pro League, so they should be in. BR Demons continues to be very consistent. I'm a big fan of Vayne, and we'll have to see how they go. Slept On, I'm not entirely sure about. I think people were rightfully very high on them after their performance throughout the summer and their first weekend of Pro League. The fact that they have got almost nothing done in Series E qualifiers, which is, in my opinion, a lower level lobby, concerns me a little bit. But they're in a good spot on points, so they have an opportunity here. But I would say Season, BR Demons, and then actually I'm looking at First Attempt. I was really impressed with the play that I saw from Enemy in Arkansas last weekend, playing with Team Esports Arena. Saucer and Bronzy, that's a ton of veteran experience on that team. And though they are on that bottom edge of the top 10, just looking at the name value, especially comparing it to a lot of the rosters above them, First Attempt is a team that I have high expectations for, and I think they can finish on a high note and really make a splash this weekend.
Oh, I was about to say, the history between Saucer, Bronzy, and Enemy Go regarding their previous rosters, it should be a very similar situation to what we see with, say, Rack Attack, right? I mean, they should be consistently walking away with performance. Granted, I think the chemistry that exists there within Rack Attack is definitely something special. And I do want to touch on the fact that I think Rakanishu, just as an individual, is such a I don't know if y'all in chat have ever had the chance to meet Rack, hanging out with the big man.
Yeah,
but he's such a sweetheart.
He
every
is.
single time I've gotten the opportunity to sit down with him, whether it be online or in person, he brings such good vibes. And I got the opportunity to like room with Raphael or Bowser, as some may.
Oh yeah.
I get to call him. Raphael because we're
You're
cool
so
like that.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's also just such a hardworking, good-natured guy, and the fact that he now gets to reapproach Pro League with a team that I know he was already super confident with. I mean, I remember the day he announced that they were going to be playing together. I remember the day that he just won preseason quals and getting to sit down and chat with him. And I'm very excited to see what they can do. So when I look at these other teams with the same kind of wealth and level of experience, there really is no excuse, right?
Yeah, I think in my opinion, Nightmare is another squad where you can kind of have that similar conversation. They don't necessarily have the same name value as a first attempt in terms of experience and stuff, but like Ronnie has had fantastic performances in Pro League. I mean, go back to playing with Premier GG in the in Champs back in 2021. It was one of the big surprise performers of that event. Bursty, of course, a very solid player. I've been a big fan of his. Draco's coming back into the roster. Of course, there was all that drama around Dracos last year after Pro League qualifiers, but like that's another team that I have my eye on. It's still going to be a tough test here. And the other thing too is that I feel like North America has been pretty wild in terms of like mixed results for teams. Yes. One squad having like a really good weekend and then not making finals. There's been I think each week there's been at least 6 or 7 teams that made finals the week prior and couldn't re-qualify again. So there's been a ton of variance, so you never know what's going to happen, but there is, in my opinion, a lot of consistency among the squads that are in this top 10, and I think it's going to make for a very entertaining weekend of Pro League quals.
Agree. So we'll definitely see how everything fares there when it comes to North America.
Yes.
I think the competition is as tight as it gets, but that makes it all the more entertaining. And I know you guys who are watching can catch that action over on Torch Prod when it does arrive. But I think that seals the deal, seals the flavor on quals here for ALGS. One more week to go.
Yes, sir. One more week to go on that front. So we could shift our gears to different qualifiers here. We could talk a little bit about Series Z because these just finished up last night, in fact, and it was Meowdy coming out on top. We do not have confirmation, to be clear, on how many teams do qualify for this season of Series Z.
Okay.
At least one squad we know. So we know Meowdy is in. Whether a buff aim assist or a zero marksman is in as well, don't have information on that. We'll get that soon. And of course, I imagine that, the staff there will be reaching out to these teams in the next week or so to deal with all that stuff. But at the very least, Cody back in Series Z once again. Meowdy was bar none the most dominant team all throughout qualifiers, putting up 325 points. For context, that is across 21 games. 325 points in 21 games. So that's a pretty good per game average for Meowdy.
21 games there. That comes out to what?
I'll do the math. I'm pulling out my calculator right now. That is just about 15.5 points per game.
That's right. It's about 15.5 points. You heard it here first.
Yep, from Zephyr, for sure.
Okay. That's actually solid. I mean, that actually is remarkably surprising because that means dominantly they had to be taking consistent averages over that of a win throughout the majority of their games here. And I apologize when it comes to Series Z. I've been a bit behind the ball. I know there's someone in chat who is particularly more knowledgeable watching right now.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact I will be seeing them quite a bit now.
Yeah. So Meowdy, super impressed with them. Buff aim assist was really good. They finished very strong as well. They had a really good performance last night as well as in the second night of week 1 of qualifiers. ING also, Internerd Gaming, with a really strong finish. Last night they had, I think, 3 wins overall, the first 2, and then finishing with a win in the final game of the night. Little too late to get into that top 3, but the nice thing, and when we talked about it on the show last night, was that this also, not only do we get to see who qualifies, but we also get a bit of a preview of a lot of the talent we're going to be seeing on Tuesday nights throughout the season, because those top teams in quals are most likely going to come back on open nights on a consistent basis. So even if a buff aim assist or a zero marksman doesn't get into Series E as a partnered squad, they'll likely be showing up very consistently on a weekly basis. That competition will continue, and I think it's going to be fun. And, we had our hands down most competitive season of Series E last season. The talent level overall, I would say, was a little bit lower than Season 3 or Season 4, especially when you consider how dominant that Vizio roster was in Season 4, or the Team Intel roster that became Team Esports Arena and then went off to TSM and Optic. Like, that talent level is incredibly high. So I think it was certainly a little lower, but the competition level was so high, and it was super fun to see all of the movement in the standings, especially late in the season. It's something that we get to talk about, Zephyr, right? The huge charge up the standings from Team Mike and Ike, the battle between Nerf and Excedrin in the final week to see who was going to win the championship. Exactly. So it was such a compelling season on so many fronts, and it made it so fun to watch. And I hope and believe that this next season can deliver on a same kind of wavelength, and I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait.
Was there, I'm curious, outside of Meowdy, was there anyone you were kind of disappointed, or even outside of this current kind of cumulative leaderboard, was there a team that you felt you had expectations for to show up and play successfully within the Series E qualifiers, or one that you may have seen them have a strong start in the earlier qualifiers but weren't able to replicate that?
Definitely Who. Who is a team that I feel like has been one of those pretty consistent and solid tier 2 squads. We've seen them a ton. Of course, that used to be playing with Stomps on the team. They've, of course, adjusted that now. But this is a team that's been really good. And as soon as I saw them playing in qualifiers, I was like, okay, that's one of my teams that I have my eyes on very early. And they did get into the top 4. But that point gap is very significant. And 139 points. And I if memory serves, I think they were in finals all 4 days. So 139 points across those 21 games is not nearly enough for a team like that. Another one is Redeem as well. They had to requalify after getting relegated. Though we do have to mention the caveat that, of course, Z Davis got hurt. Had that accident. Thankfully is okay and is recovering. That is certainly a blow to that team in their play, and they didn't make it on the top here, and they were definitely disappointing. But I'm not as disappointed considering the extenuating circumstances.
Okay. Well, either way, it was a tough race across the board for these qualifiers. Not as many openings as there were particular in the past when we discussed, at least I've been through at least the one quals entirely for what was the last season of Series E, and there was a lot more play regarding the 4 qualifiers.
Escape saying in chat, I feel like Scissor's hand injury really messed up Who's chances. I did not realize that Scissors hurt his hand. That certainly adjusts my expectations there as well.
Everyone's hurting their hand this week.
I hope Scissors is okay. But that is, some extra information there. Anything else that you wanted to hit on the Series E front before we get into some of the biggest news of these past couple days, Zephyr?
Nah, I personally, it kind of sucks for me. I was actually supposed to sit down and directly cover some of the action during the 3rd qualifiers, but I had
bailed on us.
I had life come and hit me, and I had to take care of some business.
Whatever.
And, you ended up casting them. And
a few games, yep. I jumped in there for a little bit, and then T Squared slid in to sub me out.
And then Tom jumped in, and everyone's apparently having parties over at Series E without me. Mm-hmm. Damn it.
Yep. And we had a party in Arkansas without you too.
Oh yeah, you want to talk about? Did you enjoy ReWired?
I did. Honestly, ReWired was really cool. this was, and this is super funny for the folks who like don't know how this worked out. So you might know that Zephyr and I were working Nerd Street during the summer. We went to Philly for Nerd Street Champs, and the funny thing was, like, during the summer, the Road to ReWired qualifiers were going on, and it was funny because we were in Philly, me, Zephyr, Dia, Artie, Tess, and one of the things we talked about during that was that LAN and our expectations, the teams that qualified. We were like looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And then the funny thing was, I come home. The first day I go back into the office, and they're like, "Yeah, we're doing the rewired LAN," and I was like,
We're the ones.
"Yeah," and I was like, "What is that?" Because we had been talking about it was the Monster Energy LAN. They're like, "Oh, that LAN in Arkansas." I was like, "Wait, that LAN?" They're like, "Yeah." So I was super excited for that. Went out to Arkansas, of course, last week to be a part of it. Super fun event. All the teams were awesome. Got to see KCP with Verholst subbing in for them. Team Esports Arena was there. CLG, Complexity, ton of super cool and stacked squads. A mix of not so stacked talent as well. University of Arkansas with a handful of teams. University of Alabama was out there. An all women's team. Girls got a game that was super cool. But overall, super fun experience. Getting to work with Vicky was awesome. She is a consummate professional. She was so much fun to work with. And a fucking warrior, that one. Because if you don't know, Vicky was in France for a Smash event for basically a week. Flew home on Wednesday. And then flew to Arkansas on Thursday to do this event. So she was gassed. And if you were in the building listening to her and watching her on stage, you could tell. You know, she told me, but she powered through. She was an absolute beast. She was a pleasure to work with. That was super cool.
You're too damn lucky.
Honestly,
what a sick event.
That is the thing. Complete luck too.
Yeah. Well, I really hope, and this is like my bias towards ESA, I really hope they do get the opportunity to provide more coverage for things in the Apex scene, because genuinely, I say this like from the bottom of my heart, they are one of the very few practicing Apex organizations that have offered some of the best opportunities for talent, players, and just the community as a whole. And the fact that individuals like obviously the Rewired event are reaching out to have them also provide some level of service is super good for the scene. I think it's something that needs to happen more often, obviously, because they do a good job and they know what it means to run an Apex event properly.
It was very, very fun. And the other cool part was just getting to sit down and like talk to so many teams too, like getting to meet Nasky for the first time, talking to Verholst. The other cool thing too was, and a lot of people probably know this, Verholst's family, they travel with him so much for these kinds of events. We saw, Verholst was putting out the pictures of him and his brothers out in Sweden after the Split 2 playoffs. I believe that they were in Raleigh for champs. So his family, big supporters of his, and if they have the opportunity, try to travel to events and stuff. And I actually got to meet all of his family after the end of the event. Of course, Verholst ended up getting awarded MVP after they won. And it was really cool because I got to sit there and just talk with one of his older brothers for a little while. And they felt similarly to you. You know, he talked about how he was thankful for, what Esports Arena had done and the opportunity that they had given Evan. And he was very thankful to me. And I was just like, hey, I'm just happy to be here. And to get to, meet him and be just like a small part of like telling his story, I think is super cool. But they were all awesome. Great family and super supportive of all the stuff that he does. So that was really sweet and kind of heartwarming to see.
Nice. This makes me, this is why the minute I get home in December, it's an immediate investment in a passport to find my way to the nearest next official ALGS land so I can meet up with all the homies again, because Definitely. Raleigh was great, and if it's in Europe, it'll be even better.
Fingers crossed on that one. We'll see if we get lucky on that front. Let's jump, though, into our next topic here. Let's clear last and save that. And we're going to jump over to our... There we go. It is the announcement we got yesterday from FaZe Clan that nobody saw coming.
Oh my god!
FaZe Clan is joining Apex Legends.
Yo, guys, did you know that Snipe Down is back in Apex?
Who would have guessed,
What is?
Zephyr?
I'll be honest. Like, what is there to say about this? Because it's like, oh my gosh. Obviously, the big thing is, oh my gosh, who's the third?
Another huge surprise.
Another huge question that
Yeah.
has yet to be answered. That is totally not being delayed by potential contractual obligations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's cool. We've known this was coming, right? Snipe had already hinted at it multiple times on like streams earlier. It's been pretty clear that Snipe has been unhappy with the direction of Halo esports here in the first year. And also, it's also important to note that just within FaZe, not that I wouldn't say that Snipetown is like unhappy with FaZe Clan as an org, but went on loan to E United for the end of the year in HCS, and I think that was just Snipe wasn't really, didn't really like kind of the direction that the roster was going in on a Halo front, and didn't feel like it was just a fit for him, but obviously likes the org enough that he was just like, hey, I still want to be a part of the org, and obviously at the time I imagine was well aware of the plans to shift to Apex and FaZe to be a part of that, so elects to go on loan to E United for the Halo World Championships. And so, it wasn't a big surprise, but it's super cool to see. And this takes me back to like when 100 Thieves jumped in, and it's similar to a Nick Merckx playing in Pro League, right?
Yes.
FaZe Clan being in Pro League, everybody wins. It's also, it's also the awesome benefit of like Snipe's back, right?
Oh my
God. Not playing on
narrative.
TSM with a new roster. How is he going to do? This is going to be super cool. He brings a lot of his viewership. Yeah. But it's just like having FaZe Clan as an organization and a brand in Pro League is another huge win for everybody. Just brings more eyeballs, more excitement. And Pro League is going to be so compelling this year. I cannot wait for things to get started because there are so many different compelling storylines and the competition is going to be crazy.
I will say, Matt Stanky in chat does bring up a good point though. Rip ass. Rip ass. There was a glorious moment in time. We were this close, so we had Fat and Ass both competing at the same time.
Yeah.
And it was perfect. And now it's the Knights. Wait, no, is it the Knights? The Forge? The Guard. Sorry, my apologies. The Guard. Hey, yeah,
that is another thing we can talk about is the former Torrent roster being signed by the Guard, which is actually super cool. If you're a Valorant fan, you may remember the very young roster that they had competing in VCT that was very impressive last year, and now they're in Apex Legends. What are your thoughts on that, Zeph?
I'm so excited. Obviously, we see we heard very early on what was happening to Torrent, and obviously everyone starts looking towards Rambo and RKN, and then during Champs, they pull off the wild loan out for several EMEA teams, both GMT and Invictus Gaming, to pull off a remarkable performance for GMT, notably, in a top 5 finish, which was incredible, especially after hearing Nasky's perspective on it. And obviously, that was a huge brand builder for Rambo, getting the opportunity to start to shine up there. And then they turn around. Now they're part of the Guard, and I'm very excited. Once again, any org joining is a fantastic opportunity for the esport as a whole, and it is something that will hopefully continue to bolster and keep other entities and other orgs within the esport as well. And obviously for guys like RKN, Rambo, etc. Right? Perfect. Yep. Good to see that they are stable and now consistently playing with someone.
Big dubs on that front. Let's shift to our final topic here that I know that you really want to dig into, Zephyr, and that is what came to light. And this is, of course, something that is not like new to you and I. We've had these discussions behind the scenes for a long time. We've kind of known what was going on and, how to handle it. Who the fuck knows? But give the TLDR to the folks as we kind of jump into this.
All right. So for those of you who don't know or who are not up to date, Obviously, yesterday morning, a observer within the scene, one who was more directly involved with ALGS for a very long time by the name of Bear, went out of his way to directly call out and announce that obviously the majority of talent, partners, and broadcast staff, as well as obviously the casters, such as myself and many others, have not been receiving just about really anything to put together ALGS, not just in these Pro League quals, but also in the further extent of year 2 as a whole. And granted, I have to give credit where it is due to entities like Nerd Street versus Game Time, Torch, because they do their absolute best to try to provide some level of stability, but it is nowhere close to the level necessary, especially since we are representing at times, obviously, a complete tier 2 coverage of the Apex scene, but even more so a tier 1 at times as well, when
Sure.
we are jumping on Pro League broadcasts and Pro League coverage to also provide that. And so it's been rough. I mean, you've known, obviously, it's very difficult because the average person hears, oh, you're not getting paid, just don't work.
Oh, God. I wish it were that simple.
Just don't work ALGS. And it's like, obviously, those individuals have never been in the position regarding talent, regarding what it means to not be a part of some of these orgs and these agencies at times, and etc. Yeah, just stop volunteering, as Q says. And it's not. Sorry, I have to read this because it's just so good. Board, by the way, someone in chat makes up the greatest insults in the world for me. It's one of my favorite things to read. I look like Greg from Darby of the Wimpy Kid, which I love that because one time I dressed up as him for Halloween. Anyways, completely unrelated to the dramatic topic here.
Yep. Let's derail the entire conversation, please.
That's what I do. It's tough, man. What am I supposed to say? Shit sucks.
Well,
I literally been making like 10% of my usual rate. I mean, you go look at like what the League of Legends scene, a tier 2. Let's compare it. A tier 2 scene in League is Academy. All right, Academy makes $950 a day on average, right? I don't care. I'll share that info, right? They'll make upwards or close to, right? For me, the most I've ever made off of a single broadcast has been like 150, right?
This is from the ALGS stuff.
ALGS, and that was back when Game Time was footing the bill as much as possible out of their own pocket, right? That was the pinnacle of what I was making on those broadcasts. Mind you, that is astronomically low for a caster. And obviously someone's going to do the math and be like, that's still like $30, $40 an hour. You have to realize when it comes to gig work, you are paying for the quality of your talents, knowledge, and expertise over a long period of time, as well as the prep they put into it, as well as the fact that we do not work the same amount of hours as the average hired industry professional, right?
Sure.
It's not a 40-hour work week. And so to maintain or pay for the same level, you obviously have those higher rates. But it's in terms of casting, it is dramatically, disgustingly lower and almost offensive, because at times, sometimes it just simply has been zero. There have been those days there have been those days where the turnaround is so short that companies like Versus, like Nerd Street, can't find income to foot the bill and either have to say no or just say, guys, if we want to make this happen, if at all, it's gotta be nothing. It is a free and completely nothing gig. And I talked about it this morning. I posted it. Obviously, you guys can go on Twitter and check out a lot of the stuff.
Sure.
There's been a ton of things. Jake Lucky, Bear, myself, Dia, Tom, Shriekel, and Drew, many others who have come out to just obviously tell their story about it. But this morning alone, I talked about how Split 2 Challenger Circuit number 4, completely free. All of Last Chance Qualifiers, Last Chance Qualifier number 1, Last Chance free, right? The double Pro League broadcast day that I had to do during Split 2, completely free. And the rest were all nothing. right? Basically little to nothing. And it's just it's really bad.
It is. For context on that middle finger, if you're watching the VOD, Board in chat said Yesa looks like a disowned and banned member of the Amish community, which is
Correct.
thanks.
Which is totally correct.
Thanks. I wish the beard was. I mean, I don't really, but the beard is definitely not long enough to be Amish level. But shout outs to Board in chat. But back to our conversation. I first want to address the point for folks that are like, just don't work it, forehead. Like, if they aren't going to pay you, you have to understand the situation that talent operate within. We are, and I am someone who makes my entire living is casting and hosting esports shows. I don't have a second job. That is what I do.
Full time.
Full time. That is literally my entire job. And Zephyr, you're in school, but that is also your full-time job. I don't know that you put in necessarily maybe as many hours as I do during a week because you have to split it between class and stuff.
Yeah.
But your entire work outside of school is casting. That is what your income comes from. So it's important to note that we also have to adjust around this dynamic that Zephyr and I want to be on Pro League. That's not like a mystery. This is not new information. But Zephyr and I want to work Pro League. And to get to that point, we've got to, put in a lot of hours. We both understand that we've got to work as many Apex shows as we can, as high a level Apex shows as we can, and do a good job to hopefully get noticed and get that opportunity to go work Pro League. Also, working alongside talent that either have the ear of those people. We obviously are very, lucky and thankful to get to work alongside people like Vicky Kitty, T Squared, etc. on a very consistent basis. That also helps open that door. But you have to remember that if there's a Pro League show, qualifiers, Challenger Circuit, LCQ, we don't really have the luxury to say no to those kinds of shows because ultimately we want to be on Pro League. Because guess what that is? That is one, an incredible opportunity. It is the shows that we want to work from, like, the perspective of our passion and our love for the game. And that's also where the biggest payday as a talent in Apex Legends is. And when you see an opportunity to work one of those events, that's very often a show you can't say no to. Because unfortunately, you do want to and need to get paid, right? I've got bills to pay. I've got to pay rent. I got to feed myself. I'm a big boy. I got to pay for my gas, all these kinds of things, right? Those are important, but also I hopefully want to take that next step and move up into tier 1. So these are shows you can't say no to. So as much as I'd love to be like, oh, you aren't going to pay me, like, peace out. I want to work on Pro League, and I need to work those shows, so it is not as simple as just saying, oh, they're not going to pay me, then I won't work the show. There's so much more going on, and as talent, you are trying to walk this very fine line and get as many opportunities to raise your stock from the perspective of the folks that decide who will be on these shows, and it is not as easy to just say no.
And people also have to realize this information is super public now, which makes it much easier to kind of have these discussions, because at the end of the day, when it was very, very private, there's no guarantee that you walk away from a show kind of holding your value and that the next person who comes along has the same perspective, right? Mm-hmm. And I know it sounds crazy, but losing those opportunities and giving them to someone else is a way of particularly sealing your fate for the future, to say, maybe you're not qualified or ready to do Pro League, etc., right? Mm-hmm. Because obviously when they start looking down the list of talent, it goes to whoever exists below that, or hopefully that is the perspective one may have, right? And the fact that just say no, just disappear, and then someone pops in to take that away is highly detrimental, or can be highly detrimental to individuals like us who want to find a light at the end of the tunnel and do all of this. Granted, now that it is more public, there's kind of maybe the idea of maybe we can say no, because now that it is big information, potentially incumbent talent understands that saying yes to the opportunity is particularly in bad faith towards the community, rather than them, whatever.
Yeah, and you also have to recognize the inherent risk that comes with going public with these kinds of information, or even discussing it. Right, I have thankfully never been in the position to where I've had to work an event where I'm not going to get paid, at least since I started getting paid. Right, I used to we all started doing unpaid events when we first started casting for those little tier 3, tier 4 events in whatever game we were doing. But ultimately, once we have gone pro, we get paid for these events, and I've not had to deal with that myself. But even me just discussing this, there's an inherent risk to it. Zephyr coming out and publicly being critical of EA in these conditions.
Guarantee they ever work with me ever again.
Right?
Now.
Like, there's so much risk there, because they may just
Welcome.
look at it and be like, yeah, oh, you didn't like that you didn't get paid by us? Well, fuck you. You can not get paid and also not work any event. So there's also risk there. But ultimately, and I have to commend you, as well as all the other folks who came out and publicly, spoke out about these things. I have to commend you on the courage and the willingness to come out and try and make this situation better for everybody, because ultimately, and I don't necessarily think this will happen, but there's the risk that you have fallen on your sword and may not get that opportunity, but others behind you will benefit from your willingness to publicly have this conversation. And that's important, and I appreciate it, and I hope other folks in the community as well, talent or otherwise, appreciate the risk that you and others take by coming out with this information.
I mean, at the end of the day, all this is going to be a reflection on the company and putting yourself in the situation to potentially work with them. Now you have this information, and even if it is played, you obviously now know what you are particularly getting yourself into if you do work the event. And even myself, as someone who's been trained on taking every best possible, opportunity, it's very hard for me to look towards Challenger Circuit, which is currently contractually for Challenger Circuit. I am currently set up to receive nothing, right? And all of that. That's currently where I am.
Yep.
It even still is very hard for me to look at that and say no, right? Because there's the whole background of like, it's still a very big discussion in my head right now, what I'm going to do with Apex here very shortly in the future. Because running something like this on my channel, no big deal. This is me, my own perspective, and it's talking a lot about the players and stuff that I still very much care about. But obviously, being within the gig work, I still have yet to decide what I want to do about it. Because at the end of the day, you said it. Guys like us, me specifically, it's no surprise to anyone here that if I had the opportunity to be on Pro League, I'd take it.
Yep.
And these kind of gigs and stuff have that influence, or at least you'd expect that they do. So.
Certainly. Escape in chat. Let's hope it's not time for Zephyr to rebrand as Martyr. Oh, God.
Hilarious.
Oh, man. I also do want to, as we kind of get close to wrapping this discussion, and to anybody in chat, we are going to do questions here shortly. So if you have any questions for myself, Zephyr, both of us, start thinking of them, drop them in chat when you're ready. Just go ahead. The last thing I do want to say is just a shout out and thank you to the Apex community as a whole. Because while there have been like the handful of folks that have been like, well, just don't work the event, forehead. A vast majority of the community, whether they are just fans, staff for orgs, players, etc., have all come out very largely in support of the folks that have not gotten paid by these events, and that's wonderful. I mean, even so far as his Watson coming out and saying, hey, reach out to me if you didn't get paid for these events, I will get you paid, and that is wonderful. But and I said as much in a tweet, that should not be what happens. This should not come down to his Watson or other pros or other people in the community coming out and saying, hey, like, we will make you whole because EA has not, and that isn't how it should work. Though we greatly appreciate the sentiment and the effort and the concern from those folks.
I do want to add this. I hate to say it, but you will very quickly see EA turn around and say, well, we partnered with these individuals versus Game Time, etc., right? And the expectation is that, quote unquote, now shifts the responsibility of pay towards those partnerships to foot the talent, find the talent, etc., right? And while that is understandable, people very much need to realize that due to the pressure of how these deals have been set up and the quote unquote situations, promises, sponsors, etc., that EA has set up for these partnerships, that it does fall back on them, right? They put them in the situation where they have nothing to work with, but they say you must deliver, right?
Well,
and so I really want to make it clear, because there's going to be definitely some people out there
sure.
who say Versus isn't the one paying you, right? But I mean, people need to understand that Versus does their damned best to try to put together what they can in any sort of way to try to provide for me, Warchalk, Dia, anyone else who works these events. And it's very, very, very difficult when you are not given the direct support from EA. So I really don't want any of those orgs to be taking any kind of fall there, because in part, yes, it is their responsibility that they take these deals, even though that they give zero. But the situation at its whole starts from the top.
Yeah, and for clarity, if you didn't quite get kind of the one thing that Zephyr is touching on there, a lot of these deals with a versus, a game time, etc., EA is basically saying, hey, we will allow you to cover this event, but they are not hiring these companies, meaning they are not paying game time or versus to run the event. Because that is, and ultimately when you say, well, versus is the one that's supposed to pay you, you're hired by them. If they are not getting money from EA to do the event, where is that money supposed to come from to pay a Zephyr, a Dia, etc.? That's the ultimate thing. EA is not putting any money there into that tier 2 scene from the production side. They're just saying, yeah, sure, we'll let you do it. We'll give you the rights. But the fact that they aren't getting paid means that then that money can't then filter through to the talent, casters, observers, etc.
And mind you, they do sit there and say, well, now that you have ALGS as your kind of premier broadcast on whatever,
Sure.
you can pull sponsors and utilize resources to potentially put yourself in a financial situation where you can foot the bill.
Yep.
And that has very much kind of failed on all fronts for almost every single org within the mix. And it is, I mean, that in itself, that's not a deal. That's not payment. That is, promises, which is promises don't pay bills.
Definitely agree on that one. We'll wrap that topic up here, and we'll just take some questions now. Just feel free.
A lot of questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions, slap them in the chat. A little bit of a shorter episode this time around, so more than happy to answer a few more questions than we normally would. Let's start with 2. What would be the best way for viewers of competitive Apex to support you and other casters? I'll let you take this one first if you want, Zephyr.
It's tough to say because not every caster is set up in a particular way to receive support. Obviously, for someone like me, if you want to support me, I mean, that's obviously footing the bill on things like my stream, promoting me as an individual caster, vouching for me in whatever my next pursuits are, if there are any pursuits, right? That's all you really can do. And obviously, never lying, spreading the information that currently exists within the scene and the situation that we are within, because as of right now, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. There's been no response. And currently, all I've done is literally bite the hand that doesn't feed me, apparently. And fuck all. Who knows what's going to happen? I got to start studying Fortnite,
Yeah. Yeah, great point from Zephyr there. I don't personally stream all that often, but best ways to support me, follow me on my socials and shout out my content if you see me doing stuff and you want to support me, just help me get more eyeballs on it. Watch the Hot Zone, here live, or the VOD, or the audio only on podcast platforms, and then just if you love what I do, try and help me amplify my content even further, and that helps me get more opportunities. But that's the best way to do so. Just help casters get more eyeballs on the stuff that they do is the easiest and best way to support them. So thank you for that question. Do we got more here, Zephyr? What do you got for me?
There was obviously one a little bit earlier
Mhm.
from Board. If you guys were to estimate how much are you owed, right? Which is a very, very difficult question to
Yeah.
answer because obviously, for those of you who aren't particularly talent, when it comes to directly payment, it is all varied. Every talent has their own rate, and they
Yep.
bargain with companies to secure that rate, and then that rate is paid out. So for someone like me, if I had to tell you truly, when it comes to a tier 2 broadcast, I know for entities like League, it can get upwards to 1K. I'm somewhere, I would say for Apex, I would vouch a little bit lower. I have been paid on that level before for tier 2, and I would
Mhm.
like to be. It has never come close to that level. And so, in terms of free broadcasts, in total, I have done 7. And somewhere in between the 500 to 1K range is kind of where that's at. So between 3.5 to $7,000 is typically what you would be missing. And that is based off of precedent set in the esports industry regarding tier 1 and tier 2 practices, as well as the amount of hours that I have worked, right? And that is not counting any of the broadcasts that I have done for $50, $10, 150, right? Which is
Yeah.
astronomically lower than the current standard, but it was still pay that I did receive, which, and if I was to count all 24 broadcasts that I have done for ALGS and put it on that rate, I mean, that's an insane, insane amount of money that I'm missing, right?
Yeah.
Realistically.
Yeah. And thankfully, as I said earlier, I have not worked those events, so I am not owed any money by EA. So I'm in an okay spot on that front, thankfully financially, and thankfully Esports Arena has always done right by me, as well as the other talent as far as I'm aware that have done Series E stuff for them have always been paid, as far as I know. So that is good to know. Any other questions? I didn't see any more
Yeah,
scrolling
let's
up.
see
Hit
if
me.
this is a question that can be answered. But EA not giving support related to the apparent sudden changes on what production company hosted the NA PSQs. No, guys, they haven't given budget to Nerd Street, Game Time, all this, all throughout year 2 and what is currently year 3 as well. This has been going on now for over 12 months. This isn't new. It's just the fact that it was brought up recently.
Hmm.
Notably, Torch is a very small organization that hasn't been within Apex since Spark series, and they don't have a lot of backing sponsors, etc. They've been out of the running, and when Nerd Street kind of went wherever here recently, they needed someone to do NA, right? They needed anybody, and they Torch has a history of being able to run a prod, so they reached out to Torch, right? And at the end of the day here, it does not have anything to do with particularly the quality of these orgs or who is behind these orgs. It is something that has been going on and is something that currently is likely to continue to persist unless there is a change.
Your mods don't like you very much.
I love my mods. My
At
mods are
Zephyr
great.
Cass, you ugly. Y4SO is handsome though. Good for him. He has a manly beard, unlike the ball hair on Zep's chin. Oh my god.
I love my mods.
It's gorgeous.
Met you at AL, just keep on the grain. How was the 4-week qualifier events not directly run by EA, or was it?
As far as I know, those were contracted out, correct? They're
So,
run under the EA rules.
right.
Um,
You said it very well earlier. EA basically allows these partners to be the primary coverage of these events.
yep.
But it does not go directly through the direct broadcasting entity who covers Pro League and, well, Pro League. Pro League, NA, and EMEA is the only thing that technically is directly centralized under them. Everything else is some sort of partnership with a direct other company,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at the end of the day, these partnerships come through and they simply say, sure, right? Because, I mean, for them, it at sometimes can be something they hope bolsters an effect or gives them the opportunity to have more of a place within the Apex scene in the future, which is, I mean, that's its own problem in itself.
Yeah. Truthfully speaking, even with the volunteering, is there wiggle room for you guys to potentially discuss a pay rate? Yeah, I mean, it's always dependent on who you're working with. If we're just speaking like in general as
In
a
general.
caster, yeah, that it just depends on who you're talking with in terms of like how much are they willing to wiggle, where the kind of they see the budget that they're willing to spend on talent is at, and where that matches up with your rates. But like more often than not, there is the opportunity to at the very least have that discussion. I had it with Nerd Street. I've had it with Esports Arena. I imagine Zephyr has had those same conversations, at least with those two orgs. Of course, it is very different, though, when you go to, again, the orgs that we're talking about, the versus, the game times, etc., that are not being given the funds to pump back then into these broadcasts. And I cannot personally speak to that, but that is definitely just a much more difficult conversation to have, because that is, I would imagine, often a Zephyr or somebody else coming to them and saying, here are my rates, and they're going, here's none of the money that we have, so.
And, it's, do you want to work this? Right? And then, etc. Right? Company has no budget for should be having production. There you go. I mean, that's really not, in a very real sense, that's not that hard to say no, right? And the bad thing is you do have to kind of fault the partners a little bit, right? To say that they have been essentially dealing with this current struggle, dealing with the fact that it has been no money, no budget, no anything. Right. Mm-hmm. And not stepping out of the boundaries and saying, hey, and you know what? To give you a really good example of why this is a big deal, mm-hmm. I just want to tell you right now, Game Time begged for budget. Game Time was the original host of EMEA, mm-hmm. and we worked with them for Challenger Circuit during year 1, Split 1. When they came back during Split 2 and they said, hey, we need you guys to cover Pro League, a secondary broadcast for 7 days straight, Game Time simply said, it is impossible. We cannot run 7 days of Pro League straight alongside what is going to be this upcoming Challenger Circuit. You need to give us budget. You need to foot the bill. You need to do anything instead of just letting us run it. EA broke the partnership immediately and moved to Versus within the day. Immediately. They cut Game Time off. They said goodbye.
From Zephyr.
Anyone who was working alongside Game Time no longer was working ALGS. And it wasn't money, right? I mean, but it was the quote-unquote passionate opportunity that they had. Mm-hmm. And that right there is a very quick example of what they do. That's not something that's extremely public. But Game Time was the company who was behind EMEA. And the minute they really tried to push and fight back and say no, EA said, okay, you say no, we move on. Next org, right? Next company. And that particularly is one of the most dominating, influencing factors within the scene, because they have shown that they are to quickly cut ties when that does become a problem. And no partner wants to be in that position, but it is something that is constantly hung on the back of their mind. And I know it's something that Versus knows, and I know it's something that Torch knows.
Yeah.
Right? It is a thing.
Couple things I do want to address in chat. I'm going to do Escape. I'm going to hit your point last, but that's definitely what I want to talk about. This one, though, do you think it would be doing a disservice for the small tourney to ask for the viewers to give a bit of a donation strictly for the casters to get paid? Because to be completely honest with you guys, casters make the game 10 times more entertaining by doing what you do. Thank you for that. No. I do not want these costs to be passed on to the viewer, right? You have to understand that these, EA makes money off of the production. Whether they're actually making more money than they're spending on esports through the productions, I can't speak to those kinds of numbers, but ultimately these productions make money through viewership and ad revenue. So for me, all viewers should have to do is watch the shows. Watch the shows. If you got your Twitch Prime, guess what? You get to skip your ads. You've paid that extra money, or you watch your ads, or slap on an ad block. I don't give a fuck. The last thing that I want to do is pass these costs onto the viewers. That is unacceptable in my opinion. Like, the companies who are hiring these folks should just be paying them, and also that is something that I think a majority of viewership would very understandably not react positively to. The most viewers would be like, "What the fuck?" Like, I'm here to watch a show. Why I don't why do I have to pay the casters? I didn't hire them. And I completely agree. That cost should not be passed on to the viewership. I think that is completely unacceptable. Is there anything you want to add on there before I touch on Escape's point?
I was just about to say it's very similar to what we see of his Watson right now.
Yeah,
Very,
exactly.
very similar thing. He's very kindly looking to foot a bill where he does not need to. Shouldn't.
Nope.
Is to be the correct word here. The only person who should ever be paying for this directly is EA.
Agreed.
Right? Because if they aren't to pay for it, and this is obviously at the fault of ourselves for taking these deals for so long, this just shouldn't be happening.
Yep.
If there's no money to have it. And the sad part is it really comes back to the fact that the people behind all these broadcasts are extremely passionate and they love Apex. And much like the other esports in this scene or in League of Legends, Val, etc., we want a tier 2 scene to be thriving because we know it bolsters the health of the competitive scene. And it means that in the future, we can see greater returns for ourselves and everyone involved. Right? And we know that the minute we drop out and the minute we give up, that this dies.
Yep.
It does. You need to have a thriving third-party tier 2 scene for your esports to be successful because at a certain point, it just doesn't matter anymore.
I agree. And also a good point by your boy Q. Of course, Zephyr and I are both casters. We are both on-screen talent, so we talk about it from that perspective a lot. But it is important to remember that, yes, not just casters. It's not only casters that are the ones not getting paid. Producers, observers as well. So that is an important point to be made. I do want to hit on the little point that Escape sent here. And I don't know if this is in jest or not, but Escape says it's time to unionize. And guess what? Whether it's time or not, I don't know. But I very much believe in esports talent and production unionization. I think that is an eventuality for us and for this space that will be such a huge win for for talent across the board. I think unionization for esports and on-screen and production talent would be such a good thing for the scene. Yes, does it hurt the bottom line of the big companies? Sure. Ultimately, I don't really care because it would be a huge win for all the individuals that are on the ground putting in an immense amount of work to put on these productions and shows. And I hope that that is somewhere where we can get. We've already gotten to the point where there are now talent representation. I don't know that we've seen it in terms of like production talent, but in terms of on-screen talent, you can get an agency to represent you, and that feels like a step in the direction of unionization, and I hope we get that sooner rather than later.
It's tough though, because this is a fact that people do always have to remember, and this is what makes this discussion so hard. Traditionally, esports is not something that has a very high return for most developers in a monetary sense. It is something that I do believe bolsters the health of esports in your game directly, because having it as your pedestal and your representation for what the very best of the best you can offer regarding your game is
no better
very
advertisement, in my opinion.
Right. It is your greatest outcome there. But when you start pulling back and having to view it in that direction, not every company looks at it that way.
Sure.
And obviously, it is the scary part of this whole situation to be putting up at least some level of resistance to all of this, because there is nothing that stops a company like EA from pulling the plug.
Yep.
Even and you have to hope that the public exposure and the backlash is enough that doesn't happen, right? But realistically, from a monetary kind of income sense, it would be a small dent. In the otherwise massive entity.
I completely agree. Let's just hit it, last couple of questions here. If anybody has any more that they want to throw in here before we close out the episode, because we're about an hour and 15 minutes here. Perfect length. Apex would be dead without all these people putting in the hard work behind the scenes. I agree, Borden. I agree. And Zephyr and I are lucky enough to get to work with a lot of them on a very consistent basis. Wonderful folks from observers, producers, all the kinds of things that put together these shows and allow us to just go on screen and do what we love to do. Very hardworking, very passionate. Zephyr said it quite a few times so far today, but we are very appreciative of all the work that they do, and we hope that through all of this discussion that they can see a similar windfall that we hope to see as talent.
Like I said, it's the hardest part right now. Nothing has come out of this.
Yep.
And within the last 24 hours or so, after all this information has been revealed, I can confirm in between both versus Torch Prod right now for NA and EMEA, there's been no discussion regarding fixing this kind of things. And obviously that continues to bring up the question of what someone like me will do in the future, what someone like Dia, Warchalk, etc., all these entities who are constantly under the pressure to balance their passions as well as what is right.
Yep.
And that's the hardest part right now.
Well, it would seem we do not have any more questions here at the end of the show. 2 episodes down, though, and we hit quite a few big topics. A very hearty discussion here on all the talent pay stuff, Zephyr, which I know you were very happy about. Any kind of final thoughts you want to give before we close the show?
Once again, anyone who is here right now, I appreciate the support regarding not just myself, but Y4SO and anyone else who is an entity in the Apex scene. It is by far one of the hardest esports scene to be a part of, due to how limiting it can be at times, and any kind of support you guys can show to not just me, but anyone.
Twitchy. Thank you for the sub.
Anyone within the scene is incredibly important to not just the individuals, but hopefully the future of the scene. So I think that's something to walk away with.
Awesome. I will just, my final thoughts. Thank you so much to everybody who watched today, who continues to support both Zephyr and myself. If you did miss a good chunk of the episode, it will be up on my YouTube channel. Just search Y4SO on YouTube, or go check the links in my Twitter. The VOD will be up, as well as it'll be on a bunch of your favorite podcast platforms, especially Spotify and Apple Podcasts, very soon. So I will get that up there. So if you missed it, make sure to check it out. And remember that we are live here every Thursday, 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, to talk everything that's going on. And a little teaser for y'all next week. We might have a very special guest joining us to preview the start of Pro League. So we might have to squeeze another big brain here on the screen, so make sure not to miss out on next week's episode. But that is it. Thank you so much for everybody coming and hanging out, and we will see you on the next episode of The Hot Zone.
Complex Beats.